podcast was created as a supplemental learning resource for our cognitive psychology course. The content is based on course topics and readings from Essentials of Cognitive Psychology by Christopher Klein, along with instructor-developed explanations, examples, and pedagogical framing. AI tools were used to help transform course material into a conversational podcast format, including the use of AI-generated voices. The use of AI voice technology is intended to make the material more engaging, accessible, and flexible for students. However, the podcast should not replace careful reading of the textbook, reviewing course materials, or completing assigned activities. Any interpretations, examples, or explanations included in the podcast are provided for educational purposes and are the responsibility of the instructor. Students should rely on the assigned textbook, course lectures, and official course materials as the primary sources for exams, assignments, and class discussions.
Imagine you've got a patient, right? And they have this deadly, completely inoperable tumor buried deep inside their body. You're the doctor. You have a laser that can completely cure them.
Yeah.
But there's a huge catch.
There's always a catch.
Right. So you tune the laser up high enough to actually destroy the tumor. It destroys all the healthy tissue it passes through on the way in. And the patient dies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But if you turn it down to a safe level, it passes through the healthy tissue harmlessly, but it's totally weak. Like it doesn't affect the tumor at all. So what do?
I mean, most people just freeze.
Exactly. They completely blank. But an expert, someone who really understands problem solving, instantly sees the answer. And like, not because they know more about lasers, but because their brain fundamentally organizes reality in a completely different way than yours does.
It's a terrifying scenario to be in, honestly, but it is such a beautiful illustration of how the mind works, because what you're describing isn't just a medical hurdle, you know? It's the ultimate cognitive test.
Yeah.
When the problem exists entirely within your own cognitive architecture, the tools you use to solve it are made of the exact same material as the problem itself. It's your thoughts, your memories, your deeply ingrained biases.
Welcome to the deep dive. If you're listening to this, you're obviously fascinated by the invisible mechanics of the mind. Today, we are tearing into the psychology of problem solving. Specifically, we're drawing from Chapter 9 of the Essentials of Cognitive Psychology textbook.
And for those of you actively studying this material, consider this your immersive companion guide.
But we're not here to just like read terms off a syllabus. We want to know why our brains betray us when we need them most. Why do we get stuck? And how do the people who actually solve these impossible problems manage to outsmart their own biology?
So to give you a roadmap of where we're headed, we are exploring a few monumental questions today. First, what actually constitutes a problem in the eyes of a cognitive psychologist? Second, what are the specific invisible traps that evolution has laid out for us that basically guarantee we'll get stuck?
The traps are my favorite part.
Oh, they're the best. And finally, as you tease with the laser scenario, how does the transition from novice to expert literally rewire the way you perceive the world?
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with that very first question. Because, I mean, we use the word problem constantly, right? Like, I have a problem with my boss or my wifey is acting up, that's a problem.
Right.
But cognitive psychology draws a very specific line in the sand. The textbook defines a problem simply as a situation that differs from a desired goal. It's just the gap between where you are and where you want to be.
Which is broad, but necessary. Evolutionarily, finding shelter before a blizzard hits is a problem. A hawk calculating the trajectory of a diving rabbit is solving a wildly complex spatial problem. But cognitive psychology, and specifically this chapter, zeroes in on abstract, non-trivial problems that require human conscious effort. Things that force us to, stop, deliberate, and formulate a plan.
Right. And here's where I want to immediately push back on something the text claims.
Yeah.
Because the book brings up this concept of a trivial exception.
I love the coffee thing.
Yes. It uses this guy, Nut. So Nut is sitting at his desk, and he decides to take a sip of coffee from his mug. The book explicitly states that taking a sip of coffee is not a problem.
It does say that, yeah.
And I'm sorry, but for a roboticist or like an AI developer, making a machine recognize a mug, check the fluid level, calculate the trajectory of a mechanical arm, grasp the ceramic with the exact right amount of pressure so it doesn't crush it or drop it, and then move it to a mouth without spilling a drop.
Yeah.
That is an unbelievably massive engineering problem.
It is a massive engineering problem, and it's a phenomenal point because it perfectly highlights the difference between mechanical complexity and cognitive problem solving.
Okay, go on.
So you're entirely right that the computational power required to sip coffee is staggering. But for a healthy human adult, it is contextually trivial for our consciousness. We do it on autopilot.
Oh, why say?
Your prefrontal cortex, a part of your brain handling active conscious thought, it isn't engaged in calculating the grip strength of your fingers.
Right. But where's the line then? Because if taking a sip of coffee is autopilot, what about driving a car to work? I zone out all the time doing that.
We all do.
I'll literally arrive at the office and realize I don't remember the last 3 miles. I was completely on autopilot.
Yeah.
So is driving a 2-ton machine at 60 miles an hour not a problem-solving exercise?
What's fascinating here is that you've just hit on the exact mechanism of cognitive efficiency. When you first learned to drive, it absolutely was a massive cognitive problem.
Right, I was terrified.
Exactly. Every mirror check, every single millimeter of pressure on the brake pedal required intense conscious effort and working memory. You probably couldn't even listen to the radio while doing it.
No, I had to turn the music down to see better.
Yes. But over time, through repetition, your basal ganglia chunked those individual actions into a smooth, automatic sequence. It became procedural memory. So on your commute this morning, no, you weren't cognitively solving a problem. Your brain offloaded the task to save energy.
So if the car suddenly blew a tire, then it becomes a problem again.
Exactly. The sudden noise, the pull of the steering wheel that is a sudden deviation from your goal state of safely reaching the office. Your autopilot shuts off, your sympathetic nervous system flares, your prefrontal cortex comes fully online, and you are thrust back into active, conscious problem solving.
Wow.
In cognitive psychology, a situation is only a problem if the gap between your current state and your goal state requires deliberate, conscious cognitive effort to bridge. If your procedural memory can handle it in the background, it just doesn't count.
That makes a ton of sense. It has to demand our active attention.
Yeah.
So looking at the problems that do demand our attention, the chapter divides them into 2 main flavors: well-defined problems and ill-defined problems.
Yes.
And this is where things get really applicable to everyday life.
So let's look at well-defined problems first. These are the comfortable ones. They can be formally mapped out from start to finish because they possess 3 highly specific properties.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, a clearly defined given state. You know exactly what your starting resources are. Think of a game of Sudoku. You have a grid, and certain numbers are already filled in. That's your given state.
Right. And then the second property is a finite, restricted set of operators or rules. You know exactly what moves are legal.
Precisely.
In Sudoku, you can only use numbers 1 through 9, and no number can repeat in a row, column, or square. You can't just draw a picture of a cat in the middle of the board and claim you won.
As fun as that would be, no. And third, there is a clear, unambiguous goal state. You know exactly what winning looks like. The grid is completely filled out according to the rules.
Got it.
Because of these strict parameters, start, rules, finished computers are practically gods at solving well-defined problems. They can brute force calculate every possible permutation in seconds.
But human life is rarely Sudoku. Which brings us to the messy, agonizing world of ill-defined problems. These are the ones that actually keep us up at night.
Because they lack 1, 2, or sometimes all 3 of those clear parameters.
The textbook gives a great, deceptively simple example of an ill-defined problem. It just says, please paint a beautiful picture. Think about how much of a nightmare that is from a computational standpoint.
It's impossible for a computer to genuinely solve without parameters.
Right. What is the given state? A blank canvas? But what size? Are you using oils, watercolors, charcoal? There's no objective starting point.
And what are the operators? There are no rules dictating how you must apply the paint. You could use a brush, a palette knife, or literally throw a bucket of paint from across the room.
And most critically, the goal state. What objectively defines beautiful? There's no mathematical checkmate in art. You don't know when you're done, you just have to intuitively feel that it's finished.
Solving an ill-defined problem requires an entirely different cognitive architecture. It's not about brute-forcing algorithms. It involves subjective judgment, continuous reevaluation, and often redefining the goal itself as you work.
I want to invite you, the listener, to pause and look at your own life right now. Think about your major, your career, your daily tasks. Are you spending most of your time in the well-defined zone or the ill-defined zone?
That's a great question to ask yourself.
Right, like writing a Python script to sort a database, mostly well-defined. Writing a 20-page thesis on the ethical implications of AI, wildly ill-defined. Figuring out how to budget your monthly salary, well-defined.
Figuring out what to do with your life after graduation.
The ultimate ill-defined problem.
It's a vital distinction because the higher you climb in your education and your career, the more the well-defined problems get automated by software. And the more you are left dealing exclusively with the ill-defined, messy, human problems.
So how do our brains actually tackle those messy, non-obvious problems? If there's no algorithm to follow, what are we doing?
Yeah.
To understand the mechanics of that, we actually have to look back to the early 20th century. We're talking about the 1920s and the Gestalt psychologists.
The Gestalt movement fundamentally revolutionized how we think about thinking. Before them, the dominant psychological approach was highly reductionist. Researchers wanted to break consciousness down into tiny, isolated individual components, like atoms.
Right.
But the Gestaltists argued that human experience doesn't work that way, that their famous maxim is that the whole is different from the sum of its parts.
When they applied this philosophy to problem solving, they focused on two main concepts. First, how is a problem represented in a person's mind? And second, how does solving it require a radical reorganization or restructuring of that mental representation?
Restructuring is arguably the most important concept in this entire field. To illustrate it, there is a brilliant case study from Max Wertheimer in 1945, the badminton example.
Let's set the scene for this one.
Yeah.
You have two boys playing badminton. One boy is significantly older, bigger, and much more skilled than the younger boy. Because of this massive skill gap, every single match ends exactly the same way. The older boy utterly destroys the younger boy.
Not very fun for the little guy.
Not at all. Eventually, the younger boy hits his breaking point. He throws his racket on the ground, folds his arms, and refuses to play.
Which suddenly presents a very real problem for the older boy. His goal state is, I want to play badminton. His current state is, I have no opponent.
If the older boy relies on what we call reproductive solutions, which means just repeating past behaviors or applying standard logic, what are his options?
Well, he might try to bribe the younger boy with candy.
Yeah. Or he might try playing dumb and intentionally missing a few shots to give the kid false hope. Or he might just resort to mocking or bullying the younger boy into picking the racket back up.
Notice what all those reproductive solutions have in common. They are all attempts to force the younger boy to fit into the older boy's existing mental representation of the situation.
Exactly. The older boy's mental representation is rigidly defined. Badminton is a competitive zero-sum game. The goal is to defeat the person across the net. I need an opponent to defeat.
But Wertheimer shows us what happens when the older boy achieves a restructured solution.
What does he do?
The older boy has an epiphany. He realizes he can't change the younger boy's skill level, so he has to fundamentally change the game itself. He restructures his mental representation of badminton.
Okay.
He shifts it from a competition where one must win and one must lose to a cooperation. The new goal becomes, how long can the two of us work together to keep this birdie in the air without it touching the ground?
It's like flipping a switch in reality. The physical world hasn't changed at all. The rackets are the same, the net is the same, the court is the same.
Yeah.
But the problem has been entirely transformed because the psychological grouping of those elements was restructured.
Exactly.
It's almost like looking at one of those optical illusions, like the duck-rabbit picture, you know?
That's not just a passing analogy, actually. It's the exact neurological mechanism.
Yeah.
If we connect this to the broader study of cognition, think about visual perception.
Okay, from the earlier chapters.
Right. Gestalt psychologists studied how our brains take millions of separate pixels of light hitting our retinas and automatically group them into a cohesive image. You don't see a random assortment of brown and green shapes. Your brain groups them into a tree.
We are biological grouping machines.
Precisely. And what the Gestaltists realize is that we don't just group visual stimuli, we group abstract concepts. We group situational facts, rules, and social dynamics into a cohesive problem representation.
Wow.
When you change your perspective, you change the grouping. You aren't just finding a new solution to an old problem, you are literally creating a new solvable problem out of the ashes of the unsolvable one.
And this brings us to a massive fork in the road for how we think. Because the older boy could have just kept offering candy. He could have stayed stuck. This distinction between trying the same old tricks versus completely changing the game is formalized by Gestaltists as reproductive versus productive thinking.
It's a critical binary. Reproductive thinking is exactly what it sounds like, reproducing previous responses from your past experience. You face a challenge, you scan your memory for a similar challenge you've solved before, and you apply that old solution.
Like if a door is stuck, you push harder.
Exactly. Or if a math problem asks for the area of a rectangle, you multiply length times width. It's fast, it's efficient, and it relies heavily on prior learning.
It's pulling a pre-written script from the filing cabinet. But productive thinking is entirely different. Productive thinking requires generating something genuinely new. And here's the kicker. In productive thinking, your prior learning isn't just unhelpful. It's often the exact thing actively sabotaging you.
This is where we encounter the phenomenon of insight.
Oh, I love insight problems. They are the most infuriating, beautiful quirks of the human mind. The textbook tortures our friend Nut with a classic one called the chain problem.
Listener, try to visualize this scenario. Cut is handed 4 separate pieces of a metal chain. Each of these 4 pieces is made up of exactly 3 links. So he has 4 distinct chunks, 3 links each, 12 links in total.
Okay.
His goal is to connect all of them to form one single closed continuous loop of 12 links.
Sounds easy. But there are financial constraints. It costs Nuts 2 cents to cut a link open. It costs him 3 cents to weld a link closed again. Nut reaches into his pocket and finds he has exactly 15 cents. That's his entire budget. How does he make the continuous loop?
It's tricky.
Now, I have to complain for a second because the textbook plays a dirty trick here. It presents the problem and then literally says, turn to the next page for the solution. It forces the reader to sit with the frustration.
It's a great teaching tool.
It's evil. But let's walk through what the brain instinctively does here.
The brain defaults to reproductive thinking.
Right. You look at 4 separate chains. Your past experience with building things tells you that to connect separate items, you attach the end of item A to the end of item B.
Let's do the math on that reproductive strategy. You have 4 chains. To connect chain 1 to chain 2, you have to open a link on the end of chain 1 that's 2 cents, hook it to chain 2, and close it. That's 3 cents. So one connection costs 5 cents.
Okay, you connect 1 to 2, that's 5 cents. You connect 2 to 3, that's another 5 cents. You connect 3 to 4, that's 5 cents. So you're now at 15 cents. But you just have one long line.
Right, it's not a loop yet.
You still have to connect the end of chain 4 back to the beginning of chain 1 to make a closed loop. That's a 4th connection, another 5 cents. You need 20 cents. But Nut only has 15.
At this point, the novice problem solver hits a brick wall. They run the math again, 20 cents. They check the budget, 15 cents. The feeling of frustration spikes. And this raises an important question, you know. Why does our prior experience betray us here? Students often assume that learning more always makes problem solving easier.
Yeah, we think of knowledge as a universally positive tool.
But in insight problems, prior experience creates rigid mental constraints. Your past experience tells you that a chain is a foundational unit. You instinctively treat the 4 3-link chains as unbreakable base structures. You assume you must preserve them.
Oh, wow.
That assumption is invisible to you, but it's dictating your failure.
To solve it, you need an aha moment. You need productive insight. You have to radically restructure your view of the materials. You have to realize that you don't have to keep all 4 chains intact. You can take just one of those 3-link chains and absolutely destroy it.
Let's run the math on the productive solution. You take one chain, it has 3 links. You cut all 3 of them open. Cutting 3 links at 2 cents each costs 6 cents. You now have 3 intact chains and 3 totally separate open loose links.
Now, you use those 3 loose links as the connectors. You use one loose link to connect intact chain A to intact chain B. You use the second loose link to connect B to C. And you use the third loose link to connect C back to A, closing the massive loop.
And closing those 3 loose links costs 3 cents each. That's 9 cents. 6 cents to open them, 9 cents to close them. Exactly 15 cents. The problem is solved.
Boom. It's incredibly satisfying. But you only get there if you're willing to murder your assumption that the subchains were sacred. What's fascinating to me is what is physically happening in the brain during these moments of insight.
Researchers have actually mapped this. If you give someone a reproductive math problem, like long division, and ask them every 10 seconds how close they feel to the answer, they will report a gradual, steady increase in confidence. A feeling of getting warmer, warmer, warmer.
But with the chain problem,
Completely different. If you ask someone solving the chain problem how close they are, they will report feeling freezing cold, utterly stuck, making 0 progress. They feel 0% closer to the answer right up until the literal millisecond the restructured solution drops into their consciousness.
that is wild.
There is no warmth. It's an all-or-nothing cognitive jump scare characterized by a sudden burst of high-frequency gamma band activity in the right hemisphere of the brain.
It's like lightning striking in the dark. But, I mean, if our brains are capable of these brilliant gamma wave epiphanies, Why do we spend 99% of our lives stubbornly banging our heads against the wall using the wrong methods? This brings us to the dark side of cognitive efficiency, the traps of the mind, specifically mental fixedness and mental sets.
These are the psychological chains we forge for ourselves. Let's start with functional fixedness. This occurs when your brain restricts the use of an object to its familiar traditional function. You become blind to its physical properties outside of its intended purpose.
The classic, gold standard demonstration of this is Carl Dunker's candle problem from 1945. Listener, put yourself in this room. You sit down at a table. On the wall next to you is a corkboard. On the table in front of you, there are 3 items: a wax candle, a book of matches, and a small cardboard box filled with thumbtacks.
Okay.
The researcher tells you, mount this candle to the corkboard so when it is lit, the wax will not drip onto the floor.
It sounds like a MacGyver situation, but most people fail miserably. They try to melt the bottom of the candle with a match and stick it to the corkboard. The wax cools, the bond fails, and the candle falls off.
Right.
Or they try to take a thumbtack and push it directly through the wax candle into the wall, but the tack is too short or the wax shatters.
And they just sit there baffled because they are suffering from functional fixedness. When they look at the table, they see the candle as a light source. They see the tacks as fasteners, and they see the cardboard box exclusively as a container. Its only function in their mind is holding the tacks.
To solve the problem, you have to temporarily kill the container schema. You have to look at the box and extract a different physical property. It's structural rigidity.
So wait, you just have an empty box then?
Exactly. You empty the tacks out. You use one tack to pin the empty cardboard box to the wall, creating a tiny shelf. You place the candle upright on your new shelf, light it, and the wax drips safely inside the box.
It's like if you need to hammer a nail into the wall to hang a picture, but you don't have a hammer. You look around and you see a heavy hardcover textbook on your desk. For a split second, functional fixedness says, that's a book, you read it. But if you can overcome that, you realize, no, it's also 2 pounds of solid, dense material with a flat edge. You use the book to smash the nail in. You restructured the object.
Exactly. There's another famous example in the text, the 2-string problem. Nut is in a room. 2 strings are hanging from the ceiling. He needs to tie them together, but they are spaced just far enough apart that if he holds one, he cannot reach the other.
Okay.
The only other object in the room is a heavy pair of metal pliers.
Again, reproductive thinking says pliers are for gripping, twisting, or cutting wire. None of those verbs help you pull a string that is 5 feet out of reach, so you're stuck.
Unless you overcome functional fixedness. Nut needs to look at the pliers and ignore their intended function entirely. He needs to notice their mass. He ties the pliers to the end of one string. He has now built a pendulum.
Oh, that's smart.
He swings the heavy plier string away from him, walks over, grabs the second string, and simply waits for the pendulum to swing back into his hand.
But I want to be clear here. Functional fixedness isn't a flaw in the sense of a brain breaking down. It's actually a feature of an incredibly efficient memory system, right?
That's a crucial point. Evolutionarily, it is highly adaptive. If every single time you looked at a chair, your brain had to consciously evaluate it as a potential ladder, a potential weapon, a potential source of firewood, and a potential artistic canvas, your cognitive load would redline.
You'd be paralyzed by infinite possibilities.
Yes. Semantic networks in your brain tightly bind an object to its most frequent use so you can navigate the world at high speed. The trap only springs when the environment demands a novel solution.
Okay, so functional fixedness is when we get trapped by the objects themselves. But what happens when we get trapped by our own strategies? That brings us to mental sets.
If functional fixedness is about things, a mental set is about process. It's a cognitive rut. It's a person's tendency to respond to a given task in a specific, rigid manner because that method has worked in the past.
The textbook uses a riddle that brilliantly exposes this. The water lilies problem. Listener, pay close attention to your own brain's first impulse here. There is a pond. On this pond, there is a patch of water lilies. Every 24 hours, the patch doubles in size. It takes exactly 60 days for the water lilies to cover the entire pond.
Okay, I'm with you.
How many days does it take for the patch to cover exactly half of the pond?
It's an elegant trap.
If you ask people this rapidly, an overwhelming number of them will instantly blurt out 30 days. Why? Because our mental set for math problems involving the words half and total is to divide the total by 2. Half of 60 is 30. We hear the trigger words, access the division script, and run it, completely ignoring the specific logic of the exponential growth described.
We let the surface features of the problem trigger an automatic strategy, bypassing deep logical analysis entirely.
To get the right answer, you have to stop dividing and just work backward based on the rules. If the patch doubles every single day and it's 100% full on day 60, then on the day immediately prior, it must have been exactly half that size. So the answer is 59 days. On day 59, it's half full, it doubles overnight, and boom, day 60, it's totally full.
The lilies are a great warm-up, but if we want to see the absolute sheer power of mental sets, we have to talk about Abraham Lutyens and the water jug experiment. This is one of the most famous and, frankly, devious experiments in the history of cognitive psychology.
Oh, Lutyens is a mastermind. Let's really dig into how he set this up, because it reveals so much about human nature. He brings participants into a lab and divides them into groups. Let's look at group 1. Lutyens tells them you have 3 ungraduated water jugs. Ungraduated means there are no measurement lines on the side. You just know their maximum capacity. Let's call them Jug A, Jug B, and Jug C.
He gives them a target volume to measure out, and they have to figure out the sequence of pouring to get exactly that amount.
All right, so for problem number 1, Lutyens gives group 1 these jug sizes. Jug A holds 21 cups, Jug B holds 127 cups, Jug C holds 3 cups. The goal is to measure out exactly 100 cups. How do you do it?
It takes some real mental gymnastics. You have to start by filling the largest jug, Jug B, to the top, so you have 127. Then you pour water from B into Jug A until A is full. Since A holds 21, you subtract 21 from 127, leaving 106 cups in Jug B.
Okay, following so far.
Then you pour water from B into Jug C until C is full. C holds 3, so you subtract 3, leaving 103 cups in B. You empty C out and pour from B into C one more time, subtract another 3, you are left with exactly 100 cups in Jug B.
It's an intense formula. It is B minus A minus 2C, and here is where Lutyens sets the trap. He doesn't just give group 1 that problem once, he gives them a second problem. Jugs of 14, 163, and 25. Goal, 99. The solution, B minus A minus 2C.
Same exact formula.
He gives them a third, a fourth, a fifth problem. Every single time, the sizes change, but the exact same complex formula works perfectly. B minus A minus 2C.
He is intentionally carving a massive cognitive rut in their minds. He is building a powerful mental set.
Meanwhile, group 2, the control group, hasn't done any of these complex problems. They are just sitting there. Then Lutyens brings out the final test for both groups. He gives everyone Jug A at 39 cups, Jug B at 15 cups, and Jug C at 3 cups. The goal is to measure out exactly 18 cups.
Now, objectively, this is incredibly simple. Jug B holds 15, Jug C holds 3. You just fill them both and pour them together. 15 plus 3 equals 18. It is a one-step addition problem.
Group 2, the fresh brains, look at it, see 15 plus 3, and solve it instantly. But Group 1, the group that has been doing the complex formula for 20 minutes, what do?
Group 1 applies the mental set. They look at the 18-cup goal, and they immediately start filling the largest jug. They take 39, subtract 15 to get 24, subtract 3 to get 21, subtract 3 again to get 18. They go through this agonizing, convoluted, multi-step sequence, completely blind to the fact that the 2 small jugs add up to 18 right in front of their faces.
It's staggering. They are literally blinded by their own prior success. The cognitive rut is so deep they can't see over the edge of it.
And this isn't because they are unintelligent, it's because the brain is a cognitive miser. The brain consumes about 20% of your body's energy. It is constantly looking for ways to cut costs. When a strategy successfully solves a problem, your brain releases a hit of dopamine, and it tags that neural pathway as safe and effective. When it encounters a similar problem, it refuses to spend the expensive metabolic energy required to scan for a new solution. It just fires the old pathway.
It's the ultimate double-edged sword.
Yeah.
The very mechanism that allows us to become incredibly fast and efficient at our jobs is the exact same mechanism that makes us horribly inflexible when the environment shifts. I want you to think about where this happens in your own life. Have you ever spent an hour writing a complex Excel macro to sort a list of names, only to realize later there's a literal sort alphabetically button right at the top of the screen?
I've done that.
Have you ever used a massive calculus formula to solve a physics problem that only required basic algebra? We blind ourselves with our own expertise.
Which naturally leads us to the next massive question. If past experience and mental sets can trap us so thoroughly, how do we ever learn anything new? How do we leverage our vast libraries of past experience to solve novel problems without getting sucked into the mud of functional fixedness and mental sets?
There has to be a bypass mechanism. And cognitive psychology identifies it as analogical problem solving.
Analogical problem solving is the cognitive process of using the solution to a familiar problem to help solve a completely novel, seemingly unrelated problem. It involves mapping the relationship between two things: a target problem, which is the new challenge you are facing, and a base problem, which is a story or situation you already deeply understand.
To explore how this actually works under the hood, we are going back to Carl Duncker, the candle problem guy. In 1945, he created an even more famous puzzle, the radiation problem. This is the scenario I hit you with at the very beginning of the episode.
It's a grim scenario. You have a patient with an inoperable stomach tumor. You have a radiation ray. High-intensity rays destroy the tumor but kill the healthy tissue and the patient. Low-intensity rays spare the healthy tissue but don't harm the tumor. How do you save the patient?
When Duncker gave this to people cold, without any hints or prior context, the success rate was dismal. People suggest rotating the patient like a rotisserie chicken or just operating anyway. Almost no one intuitively reaches the correct cognitive solution. But decades later, in the 1980s, two researchers named Mary Gick and Keith Holyoake decided to use Duncker's tumor problem to test the limits of human analogy.
They introduced a base problem, a completely different story set in a different time and place. The story of the general.
Let's tell the story of the general. A military general wants to capture a fortress located in the dead center of a country. The general has a massive army, easily large enough to storm the fortress and win the battle. However, he receives intel that all dirt roads radiating outward from the fortress are laced with landmines.
Okay, bad news.
The mines are calibrated to the weight of a small squad of men. Small groups can pass over the roads safely, but if the general's entire massive army marches down one road, the combined weight will detonate the mines, destroying the army and neighboring villages.
It's an insurmountable obstacle. If he sends his army, they blow up. If he sends a small squad, they get slaughtered at the fortress. So what does the general do? He restructures his approach. He splits his massive army into dozens of tiny, lightweight squads. He sends each small squad down a different mine road.
Ah, I see where this is going.
He times their march perfectly so that all the small squads arrive at the fortress at the exact same millisecond. They converge from all directions, instantly combining their strength back into a massive army right at the gates, and they capture the fortress.
It's brilliant tactical warfare. But what Gick and Holyoake wanted to know was, can a human brain use a story about a medieval army to cure a medical tumor? They designed an elegant three-part experiment to test this.
This is a masterclass in how cognitive psychologists isolate variables to find out what's happening in the brain. In their first condition, the control group, they just gave subjects the radiation problem cold. As Duncker found decades earlier, only about 10% of the participants could figure it out.
So 10% is our baseline. That's the natural human ability to solve this problem.
In the second condition, they had participants read the story of the general first. They read it, comprehended it, and put it away. Then they were immediately given the radiation problem. In this group, the success rate jumped from 10% to 30%.
Which is statistically significant, tripling the success rate just by reading a seemingly unrelated story about dirt roads and soldiers.
It is an improvement, but 30% is still a failing grade. It means 70% of the people who just read the solution completely failed to apply it. And this is where Gick and Holyoake revealed the true bottleneck.
Was the third condition.
In the third condition, they had participants read the general story, they handed them the radiation problem, and they gave them one tiny explicit hint. They said, hey, think about the story you just read. It might help you solve this medical problem.
Okay, let's unpack this. What happens when you give them the hint? The success rate leaps to 75%, from 30% to 75%, just by adding a sentence. What does that massive leap actually prove?
It proves that memory isn't the problem. The participants in the 30% group had the general story perfectly encoded in their short-term working memory. They knew the story. But having the information in your brain is completely useless if you don't know when to deploy it.
Right.
The data shows us that the primary cognitive hurdle in analogical problem solving is noticing the structural similarity between the base and the target.
Noticing is the bottleneck. Your brain has to look at a feudal army and a high-tech radiation beam and say, wait a minute, these are actually the exact same thing.
Which is incredibly difficult because on the surface, they share zero features. One is about military personnel, dirt roads, and stone fortresses. The other is about doctors, biological tissue, and malignant tumors. Those are what we call the surface features. If you organize the world by surface features, you will never see the connection.
But beneath those surface features, they share the exact same deep structure. A single heavy force is dangerous, so you must divide the force, Send the smaller parts from multiple directions and have them converge simultaneously at the center to achieve the necessary intensity safely.
When the researcher gives the hint, they are artificially doing the noticing for the participant. They are building a temporary bridge over the cognitive gap. Once the brain is told to look for the connection, mapping the analogy is trivial.
The mapping falls right into place. The army maps to the radiation rays. The fortress maps to the tumor. The mind roads map to the healthy tissue. The general strategy maps to the doctor strategy. You use multiple low-intensity rays fired from different angles all around the patient's body, and you calibrate them to intersect exactly at the site of the tumor.
Exactly.
Individually, each ray is weak enough to safely pass through the healthy tissue. But at the exact focal point where they all cross, their combined intensity destroys the tumor.
This underlying deep structure, the abstract rule stripped of all its military or medical dressing, is called a problem schema. The convergence schema is the invisible skeleton holding both stories together.
But in the real world, we don't have researchers tapping us on the shoulder giving us hints. When you're trying to solve a crisis at work, no one says, hey, remember that documentary about ants you watched last week? Apply that here. So how do we get better at noticing these schemas organically?
Gick and Holyoke followed up their study to answer exactly that. They studied a process called schema induction. They wanted to know how to train a human brain to abstract the underlying rule automatically without needing a hint. They discovered that the magic number is 2.
2 stories.
Yes. If you have a participant read 2 different stories that share the same schema before giving them the target problem, their unprompted success rate goes up dramatically. For example, they read the general story, and they read another story about a fire chief.
Oh, interesting.
The fire chief has to put out a massive fire, but if he uses one giant hose, the water pressure will burst the city's water main. So he uses dozens of small hoses from different hydrants and sprays them all at the fire simultaneously.
Ah, I see. By feeding the brain 2 drastically different scenarios, soldiers and fire hoses that share the exact same underlying logic, the brain is forced into a comparative mode. It automatically starts asking, what do these 2 things have in common?
Exactly. The brain naturally strips away the irrelevant surface, details the swords, the water, the fire, the landmines, and all that is left behind is the abstract logical skeleton. The schema is induced, the person learns the deep rule, and they can now apply it to tumors or business logistics or anything else.
Which is the perfect pivot to our final and arguably most profound topic. If schema induction is how we learn, how does a brain that has completely mastered schemas operate compared to a beginner's brain? We're talking about experts versus novices.
This gets to the very heart of what expertise actually is. Culturally, we tend to think of experts as simply being human hard drives. We think a physics expert is just someone who has memorized 100,000 more physics facts than a freshman. But cognitive psychology reveals that their brains don't just hold more information, they actually organize reality in a fundamentally different way.
And the absolute best demonstration of this is the classic 1981 physics study by Michelin and her colleagues.
It's an extraordinarily elegant experimental design that yielded completely groundbreaking insights.
Listener, I want you to imagine you are a subject in Qi's study. You walk into the lab, and the researchers hand you a stack of 24 flashcards. On each flashcard is a standard, complex physics problem, the kind you'd see on a final exam. There are diagrams of blocks on ramps, springs, pulleys, friction coefficients, the works. Your task is incredibly simple, almost childlike. Just sort the cards. Group the problems together based on how similar they are. Make piles.
The researchers gave this exact same sorting task to 2 distinct groups. The first group consisted of novices, first-semester physics undergraduates who had just started taking classes. The second group consisted of true experts, actual physics professors, and PhD candidates with thousands of hours of experience.
Here's where it gets really interesting. How did the freshmen sort the cards? They grouped them entirely by surface structure. They created a pile and said, these are all the problems that have pictures of inclined planes. They created another pile for all the problems that have springs in the diagram. They grouped them by the visual, physical objects present in the problem.
Which, if we think back to our evolutionary discussion, makes complete sense for a beginner. When you don't understand the deep mechanics of a system, you rely on your visual cortex. You categorize the world based on what you can clearly see.
But the professors, the experts completely ignored the pictures. They blew right past the surface structure. They grouped the problems based entirely on deep structure.
Meaning they sorted them by the underlying physical laws required to solve them? An expert would take a problem featuring a swinging pendulum, and a problem featuring a compressed spring, and a problem with a block sliding down a ramp, and they would put all three of them into the exact same pile.
Even though they look completely different.
Because despite looking completely different visually, all three problems could only be solved by applying the law of conservation of energy.
I remember reading that study and just being floored.
Mm.
The expert's brain literally bypasses the visual, superficial details of the world and immediately categorizes reality based on invisible, functional principles. They see the schema first and the details second.
It explains exactly why experts can solve problems so much faster and why they seem to have an almost supernatural intuition. A novice looks at a new problem, sees a pulley, and frantically searches their memory for pulley formulas, often getting distracted by irrelevant details like the weight of the rope.
Right.
An expert looks at the exact same problem, instantly recognizes the deep structure of Newton's second law, accesses that schema, and already knows the entire solution path before they've even picked up a pencil.
Let's connect this directly back to you, the listener, navigating your own academic or professional journey. Think about how you are organizing your knowledge right now. When you are taking notes or making flashcards or preparing for a presentation, are you grouping your information by surface details, like these are all the terms from Chapter 3, or these are all the case studies from 2015?
If so, you are operating like a novice.
Exactly. You are relying on surface structure, which means you will struggle to apply that knowledge when the context changes.
To transition to an expert mindset, to truly master any material, you need to deliberately practice grouping by deep structure. You should constantly be asking yourself, how does this specific concept connect to the overarching foundational theories of my field? Or what is the invisible underlying principle that connects this marketing strategy to this totally different economic trend?
Start hunting for the schemas. Look for the invisible threads tying the world together. That is the biological difference between knowing the names of all the tools in a toolbox and actually knowing how to architect and build a house.
It's a profound shift in perspective.
It really is. Man, we've covered an immense psychological landscape today. Let's do a strong tag team recap to consolidate this into your deep memory structures.
Sounds good. We started by establishing the boundaries of our field. A cognitive problem requires conscious effort to bridge the gap between a current state and a goal state. Taking a sip of coffee doesn't count.
Right. And we separated the comfortable, rule-bound world of well-defined problems from the chaotic, subjective reality of ill-defined problems.
Then we traveled back to the Gestalt movement, learning that sometimes the only way to solve an impossible problem, like the frustrated badminton players, is to completely restructure how the problem is represented in your mind.
We differentiated between the reliable efficiency of reproductive thinking and the jarring gamma-wave brilliance of productive insight. We saw how prior experience can actually blind us, forcing us to try and build chains the old-fashioned way when we actually needed to destroy our assumptions.
We analyzed the invisible traps our brains set to conserve energy. Functional fixedness, which locks a thumbtack box into being just a container.
And mental sets, where we get so addicted to a successful formula like Lucian's complex water jug math that we become totally blind to simple, elegant solutions sitting right in front of us.
But we also explored the escape hatch. Analogical problem solving. We saw how a medieval general can cure a tumor, proving that the true bottleneck to human genius isn't memory, but the ability to notice deep structural similarities. And we saw how exposing ourselves to multiple diverse examples induces problem schemas.
And finally, we looked at the mountaintop. We saw how experts fundamentally rewire their perception, ignoring the superficial springs and ramps of life to organize the world entirely by deep foundational principles.
It's an incredible journey from novice to expert.
And to our listeners actively studying this material, a quick reminder. This deep dive is a conceptual framework. You still need to dive into Chapter 9, look at the actual diagrams of the water jugs and the radiation rays, and do the hard work of building your own schemas. The neural pathways only strengthen if you put in the reps.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with a philosophical question to mull over. We've spent a lot of time discussing how our brains are evolutionarily wired to be cognitive misers. We rely on mental sets and functional fixedness because it is incredibly metabolically efficient to just do what worked yesterday. It saves energy.
Yeah.
But if our biology demands efficiency, does that mean true creativity, profound insight, and paradigm-shifting problem-solving are inherently inefficient and biologically uncomfortable processes?
Oh, that is a heavy, beautiful thought. because it implies that feeling stuck isn't a failure. It's the required friction of breaking biology.
Precisely. And as you move forward in your career, how will you balance your brain's relentless biological demand for fast, lazy efficiency with the world's desperate need for deep, restructured, wildly creative problem solving?
How do you build a reliable routine without accidentally building yourself a cognitive prison? That is a question you can spend a lifetime answering. Thank you for taking this deep dive into the Rind with us today, because as we've learned, the human mind isn't just a machine running algorithms. It is a wildly complex, occasionally frustrating, but undeniably brilliant landscape. Keep questioning your assumptions, keep looking for the deep structure, and we will see you on the next deep dive.